Today's face-off on Fox Soul. Challengers Quan LX and Big Angry Adams. Ready to go blow by blow on those hot topics. Face-off on Fox Soul starts right now.
Mr. Haley and Mr. Smith, a jury of your peers have found you not guilty on all charges with these matters.
My son was beaten to a pulp. They beat the shit out of him. That's what they did.
Those are the last words we hear from Tyre. Help me.
Police work is dirty work. It just is. It doesn't mean that the men are dirty.
And nobody's saying stop. Nobody's saying don't do it. Nobody's saying grab Emmy Martin.
Tyre Nichols made these choices.
It's hard for us to imagine how someone could say that none of the defendants were guilty of any of the charges.
He chases the suspect as he's trained down a dark street. He doesn't know what he has.
Tyre Nichols is dead and deserves to be alive.
In this round, here's Quan LX.
Charles, that was a case that really horrified many Americans across this country and shocked a lot of black people in particular, because the officers in the Tyre Nichols case who were charged with killing him were all black. And we all heard the video, we listened to the words on the video, we saw body cam, and they absolutely killed this brother, beat him to death, and had no problem with somewhat almost like bragging and celebrating the beating of this young man while he was screaming for his mother. But what a lot of people don't know is that of the 12 jurors selected in this case, they didn't choose them from the area that Tyreek was killed in where these cops worked. They went to a whole nother county, Hamilton County, and they had 12 jurors were all white, and the only black was the alternate juror. They went to an all-white county, a real redneck county that they said don't watch a lot of television and publicity, and brought them into this and had them weigh this case. And that's the only way, in my mind, after looking at all the evidence, that they didn't find a single cop guilty of anything in this case.
So the charges were second-degree murder, aggravated assault, aggravated kidnapping, and official misconduct and official oppression, right? They were found not guilty. These three officers found not guilty of all those charges. Chattanooga is, for Tennessee, a relatively good-sized town. It's where the University of Tennessee is. It is not the most diverse. It is largely Caucasian, although it has a significant African-American population, but nothing as compared to Memphis, Tennessee.
And Hamilton County,
right.
Tennessee.
Right. So the Memphis, Tennessee, but in fairness, right, this was their second trial. The first trial brought in Memphis was brought by the federal government, and again, in that trial, the officers were found not guilty of all of the killing charges. There were just some very minor charges that a couple of the officers were found guilty of. Everything serious was dismissed by that jury. So what we've seen is a breakdown in the ability, and I think from a defense attorney's perspective, you have two catalysts, right? One, you're right, like white jurors have a tendency to lean towards being statists, right? They show up for jury duty because they like the state, and they are far more likely to convict white people. In fact, the recent studies that white juries are more prone to find people of color not guilty, whereas
Who did that study? Ku Klux Klan?
Hold on.
That was a Klan study,
Hold
right?
on. Whereas African American jurors, like we had in Memphis in the federal prosecution, are there is a huge statistical disparity between them finding African Americans guilty versus not guilty.
So you the OJ jury then, right?
Hold on. So what we have here is on both sides, on the federal prosecution, well, the defense attorneys were benefited from having black jurors that were sympathetic to the black police defendants, and then you have white jurors that are sympathetic to law enforcement. So you have a double tap, because we all agree, like we see these videos where it appears They are brutally beating this
We
man
watched
to
it
death.
together.
Right. Now, he
We
did
listened to it
he
together.
did flee. He did refuse to comply.
Wasn't
He did some
resisting.
things, but he most certainly did not do anything that would have warranted them beating him to death. And the question is, how do we prevent these outcomes? And honestly,
Even after being handcuffed, they were doing it.
well, yeah, no, it was disgusting. And then it's, you know, the real question, what I'm a firm believer on, is the concept that, because when I was a policeman, it was the shift from no cameras to dashboard cameras, right? And you saw very quickly that microphone dashboard cameras in the late 90s caused officers to behave better, be less abrasive, curse less, right? And then when you see body cams in the mid 2000s start to get popular, and I've always had the mindset that cameras and audio protect good officers from bad people and good people from bad officers, and they also influence officer behavior. But here, what we saw was three monsters, in my opinion. This is just my opinion.
We watched the video and listened to it.
Especially one officer in particular beat a man to death begging for his life. And despite that camera footage, no
So
consequences.
what message does this send to black people?
Well,
When an all-white jury will come back with this kind of verdict after we all watch the video, listen to the video, and when you break the video down, this man was even in handcuffs. He wasn't fighting, biting, scratching, kicking, and they were killing this man. I mean, literally killing him, beating him to death. Charles, what message does it send? Because we just watched a father whose son was murdered by law enforcement, and we watched him retaliate against another officer in the same uniform. Now you got some applauding what that father did, which was wrong, because you killed an innocent human being. But Charles, what message is this sending, Charles, to a segment of American population, black people, when you get a verdict like this?
well, but the question, I mean, I think that's a nonsensical question, because here's the thing. What message did it send when the black jury from Memphis found the officers not guilty?
First of all, that was a federal case, right?
And they have a much higher conviction rate.
But
So
wait
it's
one
very
second.
unusual.
But wait one second. Do you know that they argued the same thing in the federal case about there was not enough black folks on that jury?
Okay.
Go back and do your research. They said the same thing. There was not enough black folks. This is what they said.
But there
And
were
that's why the
African Americans
and
on
that's
the
why
jury
state-
who
there was
unanimously
two. There was
voted,
two,
who
Charles.
unanimously
But on the
voted
federal
not
trial,
guilty.
There was two, Charles.
Okay.
And that's why
I thought it was-
activists
I
were
thought it was
demanding
5.
that the state retry them. That's why the activists
you don't
were
get-
demanding,
you-
and
so
the
you-
family were demanding that the state pursue the
So-
murder case
so-
because they felt that there was no real black representation on the jury.
Okay.
But then what wound up happening is they wound up judge approving the case to go to Hamilton County for the jury, and an all-white jury got the case. Charles,
So
you and I both watched that video.
you don't think these black officers
Charles,
were held to account because they
hell
were
no.
officers, and that
Charles, you and I watched that video. We
Right.
listened to
Oh,
the
no,
video.
hey,
that
hey.
man was screaming and begging for his life. He was handcuffed.
Like, I one time defended a police officer who allegedly, his story to law enforcement was that he shot his neighbor through the wall of the apartment because in his sleep. I called it sleep shooting. Right? That was always his story, and so that's what I argued at trial. I personally thought it was absolute nonsense, but you know, I'm the defense attorney. I'm going to zealously represent my client, and I exonerated him, right? Because I had a jury that embraced, I had a panel, and then the ultimate, those in the box, embraced the concept of statism. It is very difficult in some areas to prosecute police officers. Now,
And that don't bother you?
In big cities, no, I'm talking about reality.
Do you really sleep
in big
well
cities,
at night?
Hold on.
Realize that you put up a trumped up defense for a man that
No,
in your
hold on.
heart you felt was guilty?
I think when lawyers contrive defenses, they make it up
They do
themselves.
that all the time.
And they tell their clients to lie. I disagree with that. What I had was a client who said, this is what happened. He said it that night on body cam. He continued with that story. It's what he told me, right? And, you know, I personally, I mean, that's your job. And I believe everyone deserves a zealous defense. But I only bring that up because it is very easy in some communities to defend police officers, where nowadays
matter
in
what
big
they do.
well, hold on. In big cities, white police officers get found guilty
Why?
quite a bit
Because
nowadays.
most big cities
In
now
fact,
are controlled by people who are no longer white.
Okay.
A lot of the big cities in America are controlled by liberal people who are really no longer white people, and they're not conservative, but yet those cities that still have white leadership, they're mainly real liberal leadership where crime is completely out of control, but yet they're trying to placate.
Here's
what's better, Charles. Here's what's better, Charles.
So we saw in Grand Rapids, the officer Sure that was just prosecuted for murder of I forget the country he had immigrated from, but the repeat criminal that probably should have been deported before he was shot, a hung jury, right? They didn't secure a conviction there. A video evidence of that where he shoots the guy in the back of the head. Now the guy was on top of him fighting him and it started.
But shoot him in the back of the head.
Yeah, it's questionable.
Come on now.
But see, this is the reality that even despite all of these cameras.
But that's what people are so fed up with now, Charles.
Okay.
To where, I'm going to tell you what I think is about to happen. And I've been saying this for years, Charles. That in the black community and in the brown community too, there's going to start be acts of retaliation about this.
Yeah, we've already seen that.
But I've been saying it for years.
But we've been saying it for years.
Before it ever happened, I've been telling you,
Charles.
Charles.
We've had so many law enforcement
they got to
officers
do something to restore the faith of poor people back into the system.
Okay, but
Charles.
how about those? Let's instead of drawing this divide between poor, because
there's a divide.
When you look in African American communities, it doesn't seem that wealth has a huge impact on the crime commission rate.
Well, what affluent black community got a lot of crime?
Hold on.
Stop
they
it.
do.
What affluent, rich black community got a lot of crime, Charles?
Look at the data
Stop
on
that,
the Commission
Charles.
of Crime.
You
lying.
go to a rich black neighborhood, they crime is going to be equal to the rich white neighborhood
but
too.
It's not.
But
I know you like to make stuff up, but
police
it's not.
don't police rich white children
the
way they police poor children.
So hold on.
Rich black children get privilege too.
Hold on. Right, one, you're absolutely wrong. Look at the data, but there's not time for that now.
Rich black kids commit all of crime. Stop it, man.
But there's actually a static.
You know how much dope them rich white kids be smoking and
yeah,
snorting?
Absolutely. And I think the
and
drug
cocaine parties they be having.
I'm talking about violent crime. I agree with you that drug use is static amongst all races, and African Americans have been oppressed far more for their stupid war on prohibition. But I'm talking about violent crime. And so when you mentioned it, you talk about these liberal cities that are overwhelmed by crime. Okay, so who suffers the most from that? Right, you're talking about the
poor
black
people.
Hold on,
and the people who live there.
No, but hold on.
And they got white folks still living there too, not just all black folk.
But black people, law-abiding, rule-following black people, suffer overwhelmingly the most from violent crime in this country. Black criminals commit the most, but it is black people suffering the most. And then when you have law enforcement that is hobbled, when you defund the police, when you have police that just like, well, if they're going to arrest me, I'm not going to do it. So you have this kind of self-perpetuating machine.
Raising police budgets when you see these cops in Memphis get off like this. If you're a Memphis citizen, and you look at this, and you watch that video, listen to the video, how in the hell would you feel comfortable asking that constituency for a police increase?
Because there was the police department, there was accountability. They fired him, right?
Because they watched the video. They listened to the video.
Right. Both the DA's office and the U.S. Attorney prosecuted him. There was a lot of effort to...
And an all-white jury let him go.
To secure convictions that failed, right? And when you talk about it, there was far more violence directed at cops than violence directed by cops to people. Deadly force. You have just a growing number of cops that have been sitting in their cars getting assassinated.
This young boy here, Mr. Nichols, he had no weapons. He wasn't committing no crimes.
He wasn't
fleeing a crime. He wasn't running from a robbery, or he hadn't stolen somebody, anything like that.
But he did run.
Charles.
He was refusing to comply.
But Charles, listen,
it doesn't mean he should have been beaten to death.
And he was never driving at a high rate of speed. He was driving slow.
But he refused to comply.
Had his flashers on, Charles, and driving slow. And they killed that boy, Charles.
Okay, but instead of having a conversation, right, about what we can do to make sure young men are being killed by law enforcement, and what we can also do to make cities safer. What you're doing is you're saying, the whites.
Two things.
Let's hear it.
Two things.
Okay.
One is very painful, but the two is going to have to be accepted based on reality. One, brothers and sisters, we have to tell our young boys, no matter the circumstances, comply with the officer's request. If he's wrong, if he's corrupt, and he's a dirty cop, he's an abusive cop, we'll get him in court later, perhaps, but this verdict. But we don't want our young men trying the situation on the street because they're not going to win. So if we just comply and beat them at their own game, a lot of our young men will survive and live to tell their stories. But when you watch this case, Charles, I don't know, man. This was a horrible video and horrible audio, Charles. For them to be found not guilty on nothing,
People,
zero.
Absolutely. Well, in the federal prosecution, they secured a couple of low-level convictions, but the truth is that, and they were lying convictions, right? obstruction of justice type. It wasn't obstruction.
But they were proven to have been lying.
Right. Now look. I mean, if you look at so many things when you talk about compliance, right? I used to work with kids, right? And when I was doing criminal defense work, and I've represented, probably 10,000 African American men, thousands of them in violent crime situations. But I would also talk to people's children of all races, right? But I talked with a great number of young African American teens about how to successfully maneuver themselves through law enforcement stops, how to not waive constitutional rights, but also not put themselves in a situation or limit how much exposure they have. I stopped doing that when I started getting accused over and over again of being a white savior, of being racist in my efforts to just save people's lives. Because we talk about so much crap. It's like earlier in the week. We talk about crap, but we don't talk about solutions. And we have so much violence, like Memphis. What an incredibly violent town. For a while, the murder capital of America. I've been to Memphis several times. It should be this robust, beautiful community on a river with great food and a great music scene, but it is a scary town.
But it's going to get worse.
And but the solution isn't to tell cops to stand down and be scared.
It's going to get worse.
We need more. We need more enforcement on victim crime.
The worst is yet to come.
Well, I don't disagree, but why?
When you got men like Elon Musk that says that in the future, within
I'm
10
no
years,
fan of Musk, but
within
come
10
on.
years, 80% of the American workforce will be lost to artificial intelligence.
Well.
When you got 80% of people who no longer can find a job or have a job, and there's a standardized welfare for everybody, crime is going to explode.
Well, I would think,
in every community.
I would think that universal basic income would actually limit crime, but that's a topic.
With no jobs?
It's a topic for another day. Quanell, just last week, Tory Lanez, the entertainer, who I met here in Houston years back, posted a picture of himself in prison looking very, very fit. Now, just a few days later, it was posted on TMZ a couple of days ago. He was in the correctional facility in Tehachapi, California, stabbed and rushed to the hospital by ambulance. We have spent a lot of time recently talking about violent crime, especially in urban communities, and what we can do about it. But one thing you don't have a lot of conversations about is violent crime. And let's see, we have a graphic, Matt, from TMZ, Tory stabbed in prison, right? What we don't have a lot of conversations about in America is how violent and unsafe our correctional facilities are. Even in states like the very progressive California, which is also, like the 5th largest economy in the world, they have one of the most unsafe prison systems that is also largely racially segregated by the own prisoners, not by the staff, and just incredibly dangerous. And how do we expect to reform people and stop recidivism and have people go to prison and serve their time and serve their debt to society and then come out and contribute to society if prison rape is incredibly common, if prison violence like this stabbing that has him in, it's my understanding he was in critical condition, and this is someone that is media aware, that's prominent. If they're not protecting Tory Lanez, how many people that we don't know about, that we don't hear about, are getting stabbed every day? We've got to do something to make our prison system more safe and for it to turn out people that aren't going to go back to prison or go back to committing victim crime.
Charles, to be honest with you, there's not a whole lot you really can do to make prisons really a very safe place for prisoners.
Yes, you can.
Unless you're putting the majority of the prisoners on 23-hour lockdown a day, which I do not support. Charles, a lot of strong conservative governors in conservative states ripped and stripped the prison system of all of their rehabilitation programs.
They took all the money out.
Took all of the rehabilitation
Republicans
programs out.
stripped them down to let them all sit there in some sort of...
So now, what you got is what you just said. They're just sitting there with no programs, no rehabilitation, no opportunity to really clean themselves up and remake themselves to where when they leave prison, the drug addiction problem was addressed inside prison, alcohol was addressed, their problems inside prison. Charles, so when they leave, they have employable skills, etc. Charles, now in prison, they got just as much dope in the penitentiary as they do on the streets.
Moonshine,
Charles,
cell phones,
now,
weapons.
And in prison, you over and over again, you see female guards coming up pregnant by the prisoners.
Well, I mean, you hear about
Charles,
that.
this is happening often. Charles, just like it's happening in schools with teachers sleeping with students, it's happening big time in these penal institutions. Secondly, what many people don't know, what happens on the streets often is dictated from what's happening inside the prison. And they are racially segregated, Charles, and that's pretty much in every state in America.
Well, they're self-segregated, right?
Exactly.
Like you're told, as a white man,
gotta choose
if you
what
eat
you gonna
with
do.
a black man, they're going to beat you down. If you eat with a black man, if you socialize with the white man, you're going to pay a price.
Hispanic, same thing.
Right. Oh, no. Right.
That's why you have the Aryan Brotherhood.
Right.
That's why you have the Texas Syndicate Hispanic Gang, Mexican Mafia Hispanic Gang. You have the Black Guerrilla Family, Crips and Bloods.
Where I disagree
Charles, they're all
with you,
segregated.
where I disagree with you is I think if states spent the resources necessary and the
They
manpower
can make
and the staff,
improvements.
smaller pods,
It can help.
guards in the showers, you could
But
make
you
it
and I both
safer.
know they're not gonna
And
do it.
nobody wants to spend the money. But if
You know they're not gonna do
California's
it.
not keeping people safe, then who is going to? Because California
Without
has
those
the resources.
programs, Charles, you're not going to make it safe without those kind of programs.
That's it for the Face Off on Fox Soul. We'll catch you next time.